Entrepreneurship is often portrayed as a story of constant success, but the truth is far more complex. Businesses rise and fall, markets change, and sometimes the greatest test of an entrepreneur is not how they succeed, but how they respond when things go wrong. Rael Levitt's career has been defined by both remarkable success and profound challenges, from pioneering large-scale property auctions to building new ventures like Inospace and co-founding the airline Lift. His journey reflects the resilience required to build, rebuild, and keep moving forward. Today on Braadcast, we explore the realities of entrepreneurship, the risks, and the lessons and the mindset required to start again when everything changes. Rael, welcome to the Braadcast, and thank you so much for saying yes and agreeing to be here with us today.
Well, thank you, Norman. It's been a great success. I'm excited to be here.
So, Rael, listen, there have been many people that have worked with you. There have been many people that are friends with you. I'm one of those who's worked with you, who's been friends with you, who's been not friends with you, who's worked with you again, and we are again building a relationship and together again. And I must say, from the very first time that I ever met you, something stood out, and I knew I wanted to be a part of that journey. But this is not about me, this is about you and your story, and I'm excited that you're here today because I think there's so much more about Rael, about your tenacity, your resilience, just the ability to create, start, invent, reinvent, your highs and lows, and the story from when it all started. So for me, this is even something, a lot of things I knew, but a lot of things I haven't known. And this journey over the last period, I think will go down in many, many years to come, and we remembered of all your achievements. So I'd like you to take us back to actually where it all started. I mean, where did you grow up and where did you start? And tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I'm a boykie from Bellville, which most people do or don't know. It's the northern suburbs of Cape Town. And I'm the youngest of four. My late father was an attorney, small town attorney in Bellville. And my mother was always the shrewd one. She was in real estate. And as a kid, we grew up with real estate. Like many Jewish families, business was discussed around the table. Probably like yourself, I had quite a matriarchal mother. She ran the show, and we always spoke about real estate. So to sort of to fast forward on how I got into real estate is that my mom, to supplement my dad's practice, which was a very small practice actually, and he would have struggled to make a living. My mother always was building, renovating, buying, and selling as an estate agent. And I was interested. I was a bit of a loud lummocky.
But how old were you at that stage?
I used to go with my mom to show houses when I was 8 years old. I used to go with her in the car. She would pick me up from the bus stop. I went to school at Hertzley in Cape Town. We'd come through. And I actually grew up with it. I used to, in the early days, I used to walk around with her and she showed houses. I was always interested.
But there wasn't an abundance of money in the home where you could, or I mean, was it always difficult times, or did you just want to do it because you just loved being interested in what your mom was doing?
Well, we were like middle, like what we'd say sort of white middle class of that era. I mean, truth be told, it wasn't really middle class. My dad was an attorney, but there was an abundance of money. It was tough. My mother was always very stressed about money. I think I inherited that, in fact, that anxiety to perform and to keep, we had a big family, to keep everybody going. And so I was interested in it. I just liked it. I didn't actually have an interest in anything else. I wasn't playing sport. I wasn't socializing much. I was very interested in it. And I sort of fast forwarded into my teens. My parents then moved, like many Jewish people, they moved from the northern suburbs into Sea Point. And even then, when I was 10 years old, my parents were looking at houses. And to this very day, I remember every house they saw, we used to go with. And I remember the homes in Bantry Bay and Sea Point and what they paid and going around with the estate agents. And I was actually like actively invited to give my opinion because they listened. They were a bit older. I was suppose a bit precocious. And I used to nag them. I said, "Oh, mommy and daddy, you must buy this house, buy the house." And so eventually they bought a house. And I was when they renovated it, I used to be involved as a kid.
That's amazing. But I'm saying, from there, you obviously you carried on, but you needed to make money. And so how did you make money out of that?
So when I was 17 and I finished school, I decided I was going to become an estate agent. And all my friends were out jollying and drinking. I never did any of that. That came later when I did my MBA when I was 40. So I literally, my parents, they just allowed me what to do. I think after 4 children, they were a bit tired. They just let me do what I want. So I used to take my parents' car, I didn't have a driver's license, and I just started knocking on doors. Now, the doors I knocked on, it was a very interesting time because it was like just on 1990. 1990, the New South Africa hadn't come yet. Nelson Mandela had been freed, so we knew the New South Africa was coming. And I noticed, through my mom, there was a gap in the market. So I went to the Cape Flats because there were no estate agents. I mean, all the big agencies of the time, they're still around, the Goldings and the Seifs and all the big, they were big agents in Seapoint. And I decided to choose the Cape Flats, which was in those days still proclaimed like a so-called coloured area, and I started knocking on doors. And I'll never forget my very first house. I used to, talking pre-cell phones, pre-everything. I would write a note. I'd photostat like cards, and I put a note under somebody and say, "I have a buyer for your house." Of course, I never had a buyer, and they phoned me. They phoned me. In those days, they phoned me. It was cell phones had just come out, and I was like one of the first to get a cell phone. They phoned me, and they said, "Okay, we want to sell." I then rushed off to the Argus newspaper, and I put an advert in. Now, my mom had been in real estate, so I had to have good knowledge, and my dad was a lawyer, so it did help. I lined up 3 appointments. I drove out there in my mom's car. I stole it out the garage, no driver's license, and the third person said they want it. I called my dad. We signed up the deed of sale on the bonnet of the car, and then I sold my first house at 17. And that's basically how I got into real estate.
Okay, so from real estate, you started selling. Did you buy anything at that stage?
No, I didn't buy. So I was 17. I was really young. I wrote the estate agent's exam at that stage. The problem was in 1990, it was the end of the army period. And it was a choice. I had either to go to university or I had to go to the army. My late father was a bit of an academic snob, and he was like, "Nice Jewish boys go to university. You have to get a degree. It's like not even up for conversation in this house." And so what I did was I organized with UCT to start in June. And so for those few months, I made, in those days, a sort of princely sum of 20,000 Rand on commissions. And I was in the game. And then when I went to UCT, I was studying law. But the very first thing I did, everybody went to UCT and everybody was getting pissed and jollying. Me, I was talking to the staff who worked at UCT because I knew they got subsidies. And every single day I used to talk to them, and I would take them out in my car and I'd show them homes. Now, in 1990, interest rates went to 24.5%. There was thousands of repossessions. And so I discovered that in those days, APSA had just formed, and PERM and Samba and all the organizations which don't exist today. Had repossessions, and I bought a fax machine. They used to fax me these lists of repossessed properties, and I would take the staff to show them houses.
I want all the young viewers to listen to this, because a lot of the young viewers, I don't think they even get into property or understanding or selling or buying or anything, any exposure until in their mid or late 20s. They looked after, they stay at home. And so, I mean, those days was something maybe not the norm, the exception, which puts you ahead of the curve. But I'm saying you're advanced, you've already done multiple deals, you already got commission, and you understand how it works. I mean, if you put it all into perspective, it sometimes takes people a career to get there.
Well, I mean, if one of my favorite books is The Psychology of Money, and if you read the book of The Psychology of Money, they say those who start early, and he references Warren Buffett, can be much more successful in whatever endeavor you do. So the earlier you start, you just have time on your hands. And I was young. Then actually what happened was the banks were so desperate to sell, they came out with like a plan. And I'll never forget, they sent out a fax and they said, "Look, we will sell houses and you don't have to put any deposit down. In fact, you don't even have to take transfer. You can take transfer in 3 years' time. And they came up with it was called a deed of alienation. And I looked at this and I never remember. I was still a kid. I was talking to my parents and I said, wow, you think I could buy a house? And my dad was like, oh God, what's this one getting up to? And I literally then bought my first house with 0 deposit down. It was a vandalized
They allowed you
home.
to pay it off.
And the bank said, okay, as long as you can pay it off. And it was a deal which they were giving everybody. And so there was a little issue because at that stage I was still white. It was just the end of apartheid, and it was in a colored area. And so I set up a close corporation with a woman who still works for me today, Fatima Latif. We set up a CC. She was a 51% member. I was 49%, and I bought this home. And it was vandalized, and I had to now. I bought a car with my commission, and I went to a place in Cape Town called Dillerray Hardware. They've subsequently, the Gomez family, he sort of liked me. The old man Gomez, they're quite big property people today. And he literally gave me credit to buy tiles, and I found a builder and started renovating it. And that is actually how I landed up in the auction game. Was when I was now 19, 20, summer holidays. I'm standing at my new home, which I bought at 33 Lima Road in Blue Downs in Cape Town for the princely sum of 30,000. I had already sold it for 75,000 to a woman who worked at UCT, but I had to renovate it. So I'm renovating. A guy drives past in a white bakkie, and it was the sheriff of the court. And this is pre-Google Maps. He asked me where another street was, and I remember the name to this day. It was called Happiness Street. Obviously, it affected me. And he said to me, I'm looking for such and such an address. And I said to him, come, I'll show you where it is. And we drove there, and he did an auction. And I stood there, and I looked at this auction. It was me, the sheriff was the auctioneer, and it was 2 officials from First National Bank. And he looked around, he said, there's no one here. And the guy from the bank said 10 Rand, and he said, sold. And I was like, what? So my one benefit, I always could talk Afrikaans because I was from the northern suburbs. So I said to him, luister oom, as ek 11 Rand gehad het, kon ek daai huis koop. If I had 11 Rand, could I buy that house? He said, no, my boy, you don't understand how it works. He said, come to my office and I'll explain. And it was a guy, he was the sheriff, his name was Eddie Leona. I went to his office at the age of 19, and he explained to me how auctions worked. And I then decided, and he said, come, sometimes there are bargains. So I remember I had a home, I sold it, and I literally every single day at UCT, I befriended a guy who was at UCT Radio. I used to park on campus. In those days, you had to look smarter. So I had a suit. I was a little fatty, so I used to have a suit. I used to run into.
You were a little fatty for a long time.
Yeah, I was a little fat boy. It was very unusual to see a little fat Jew walking around the Cape Flats. Yeah. I mean, people either thought I was a Mormon trying to sell religion, or I was actually working for the police at that stage. And it was like a little.
It made you likable.
I did. I was always quite chatty. It was unusual to see a 19-year-old little fat Jewish boy walking down Mitchell's Plain on the road, knocking on doors. And
won't go down so well today.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't. I probably didn't go down well then, but I didn't mind. I was just seeing this. It's like there was no competition, like zero. And I started then. I arrived at an auction one day. The sheriff said to me, "This is your lucky day." It was the then Standard Bank. I knew the prices, and I think for anyone in real estate, knowing your prices is absolutely critical. If you know values, you know the game, and you can advise people. And I knew the prices in the areas I was working, and so I bought a home for 20,000, and I started, and I sold it then for 80,000. And literally, before I was 21, I bought over 20 properties. They were little houses. I bought and sold, and I then discovered one day the thing that everybody knows in real estate, that cash flow is critical. And my parents didn't really know what I was doing, actually. I mean, the lawyers were writing to me and they said to me, listen, you have to take transfer of all these properties. And I panicked. My parents didn't have that sort of money to help me out. And I thought to myself, look, I'm going to all these like sheriff's auctions. The sheriffs are absolutely useless at these auctions. I could do those auctions. And I saw that on the fall of the hammer, you would get your commission. And so I then decided I'm going to be an auctioneer. Told my dad, he was absolutely horrified. He said, an auctioneer?
In the middle of your degree?
In the middle of my degree. He said, no, my boy. You have to become a lawyer like me and you can come into my practice. He had a tiny little practice in Belleville. He was doing like the occasional divorce.
For you, but not for him.
Correct. So he wanted me to be a lawyer, and he actually was very cross with me. My mom was like commercial, and she was like, if this is what he wants, like, there are not many parents who could say their kids under the age of 21 had bought and sold properties. And so I literally decided I am going to be an auctioneer. And that's how I became an auctioneer. And I had met at these auctions that I was attending, I'd met like all the guys because they all used to come, and it was like boring out there, and I used to talk to them. And so I approached ABSA. And
at your first auction,
I was 21. I just, in fact, it was before I was 21. I secured. So the guy from ABSA was a guy called Gerald Jordan. In fact, I've written a book. It was how my book starts. I meet this guy, Gerald Jordan, and he says to me, listen, Putty, like, we use Claremont, we use Michael James, we use Orco. Why on earth would we use some like little lighty who's like, he was flucky. So I said, look, I will work when no one else will work. And I will go into the Cape Flats, into the black townships. I will do auctions there. And then he said to me, yes, actually, we have a big problem there. And of course, all the other auctions, they were all wealthy. I mean, they're all cruising around in Mercs and BMWs. But they didn't want to work in those areas. They were all scared, but I wasn't scared. And so my first auction was 31 bank repossessed properties, actually in quite a nice area in Brackenfell near the ShopRite head office today. And my very first auction, not knowing what to do, not having any experience, not having anyone to tell me what to do. My first auction was 31 bank repossessed properties, which I sold them all. And then I got into the auction business age 21.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you talk about, you've written your book. So if anyone, they'll go through the whole thing, they can read the book. It's a lot in more detail there about it all that happened. But so that was the start of and was it called Auction Alliance from the very beginning?
No, not at all. In fact, I called it Levco because that was my surname. I still got a few friends called me the other day. Somebody WhatsApp me said, hi, Levco. Yeah. So it was Levco Auctions was my auction business.
Okay. And then it obviously got momentum like everything else. I don't know many people that work harder than you. So it's not a surprise for me that it grew very quickly and fast, and it exponentially went into bigger things. When did it start really realizing that this was a business now? You need to surround yourself with people and growing, and you're going to build a business now, because you were doing auctions solo, but now you were going to build a business.
So I built a small team of people. I got a secretary in those days. I got an assistant to help me. And I really worked, when I say I worked hard, I literally worked 24/7. I hired a little warehouse in Belleville. Ironically, I actually own that building.
You work 23/7 now.
No, I work 23.5/7. So, I mean, you're talking, long time ago, over 30 years ago. Yeah. So I worked really hard, and I've always been my brother is an international chess champion. He played chess until his 40s. And so I've always sort of liked strategy. And my strategy was, I'm going to dominate the northern suburbs because no one else was there. I've always if you can get into business, no competition. So I dominated the northern suburbs, and it grew. And I also discovered the media, which is quite ironic if you know my story. It was the media who caused the ultimate collapse of the business. But I discovered the media, and I got into some high-profile events, and it became a story. And then I was approached in '94 by Lawrence Seif, him and his cousin Mike Flax, who was on your show recently. I was quite fascinated with the story because I was actually part of that movie. In '94, they decided to list Seif, and as part of their listing, they needed to bulk up, and so they then approached me, and I was like a small operator, and I went to go see Lawrence Seif at Seif House on the foreshore, and I said to Lawrence Seif, look, I've always been an avid reader. Today it's much easier, but I'd always read the newspaper, and I was reading in the newspaper that Seif was getting very close to Boland Bank, which had been taken over by Christo Visser. And Boland Bank, I knew, owned an auction business. So I said to Lawrence Seif, look, if you go buy Boland Bank auctions and put together Levco auctions, and I'll come be your MD, and I will sell out to you. And that's exactly what happened. At the age of 24, I'd been in the business 3 years. I sold Levco to them. In those days, it was 5 million rand. I thought I was Steve Jobs. I was going to retire. And I went to go work at Seif Auctions, which was actually part of the listed Seif holdings, of which Mike Flax was running Seif Trust. The Seif brothers were running the other Seif. And we were one of the 4 divisions of this listed company.
Well, seeing that he's got his handprint on all of you. I think Lawrence is my next target to see if I can get him on the show.
Well, I mean, I actually do believe that Lawrence and Mike Flex is their first cousin. These were pioneers of real estate, and some of them have been unrecognized for their pioneering ways.
And then you changed the name to Auction Alliance?
No, I didn't. I changed it to Seif Auctions.
And then
I went to
you
Seif
bought them
Auctions.
out.
It was the only time I ever worked. I've actually been a CEO of mine from those days to now. But as part of the business, I became the MD. I worked at Seif. I absolutely loved it. And then one day I heard Mike spoke about it the other day. Braad bought Seif. And Mark Barnes was the CEO of Braad. I then started doing charity work because it was the new South Africa had arrived. And in 1994, 95, no one had ever heard of charity auctions. Probably my one contribution to the auction industry is actually the charity auctions, not the commercial auctions. Well, we'll talk later about commercial property, which no one had ever done at that stage. But charity auctions was my big thing. And I'd read again in the newspaper that Nelson Mandela was planning to do a big event. It was the Blue Train. And I phoned up the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. I was never scared to phone people up. And I said to them, I would do the auction. And they said, no, we're getting an auctioneer from London. And I convinced them on the back of the Seif brothers, because they were very cool, the Seif brothers. Samuel Seif was going out with dating Miss South Africa. And I said to them, look, we'll come and I'll do this auction. And that put me on the front pages of the newspapers and TV. It was a big event. I met Nelson Mandela. I did a huge amount of work for them. And we did these charity auctions. And they raised tens of millions of rands. They were very high profile. I would work a day and I'd do charity auctions at night. It was a very tiring period, actually, because I literally would be doing auctions the entire
But you made a name for yourself.
I made a name for myself. I met Mark Barnes at one of these events. He said to me, look, we're going to be delisting Seif, and Flax is going to be taking Seif, going to be becoming Seif Trust. He actually went off with them. The Seif brothers are going to buy back, and don't you want to buy back your auction business? And my answer was, not a chance. I don't want to buy the auction business.
Really? Why would you say no?
Because I wanted to go live in Australia. I was like, it was, all my mates were going to go live in Sydney, and I wanted to go live in Australia.
But you were doing so well.
I was worried about South Africa. It was this was now 1998. There was a big recession in 98. And I thought, look, I've cashed in my chips now. The Seif did a very clever deal. The Braad share price shot up. So Seif shares were swapped for Braad shares. So I made quite a lot of money on the regional Seif, because I sold in part cash, part shares. And I wanted to go live in Australia. And I had been going to Australia to check in, and I'd go to the auctions in Australia. So I'm going to become an auctioneer in Australia, which what led me to actually doing the big auctions, which and you were part of. And I negotiated a deal, and they had bought Bullion Bank for like 10 million rand, Lefco for 5, and they were in for 15. And I bought the whole thing back for like 2 million rand. I struck a deal with Barnes and Lawrence Seif. And suddenly I had this new business, which I now owned, and we had branches actually in Pretoria and all over the Western Cape. And suddenly at the age of 28, I bought everything back for $2 million, which is a great deal. It was under its net asset value. And the condition was that I had to rename the business. They didn't want me to carry on with the name Seif because it was getting mixed up with their estate agency. And so I went overseas. Star Alliance had just brought out Star Alliance, which is the airline grouping, and I wanted to call it Alliance Auctions. I couldn't get that name. I went to my accountant, Gary Lockett, who I'd met at UCT, and he said, you can get the name Auction Alliance. And I said, okay, take it. And in 1998, I started Auction Alliance. But I'd already been in the auction game for 6 years by then.
And you had a team.
And I had quite a big team, actually, because I inherited this team of people, because Seif Auctions remember, it was a combination of Bullion Bank auctions. So we had like offices, a guy called Peter Geldenhuis in Pretoria. In Cape Town, we had a whole group of people, and it was about 30 odd staff. And I was now the CEO, putting my prospects of going to Australia in the bag, and it was Auction Alliance, and it was a small business.
So it must have been pressure for you. I mean, no matter which way you look at it, it's your own business now. You're responsible for all the people in your business. You don't have the back end of a big company behind you, like Braid or whatever, and you go in. But it must have been tough. Must have been difficult. I mean, those next 5 years before the wonder years, which I'd like to talk to you about afterwards. Challenges and things and difficulty, and you had all these branches around the country.
Yeah, so I'm now 28, I've got all these branches. I cucked myself. And I would be a liar to say that it was easy. I suddenly looked around and said, look, I've got an overhead that I have to cover every month of excluding my own. I never drew. People always, it's like the one thing about business is everything takes time. People believe it all happens instantly. It doesn't. And I suddenly had these overheads and I didn't have the big backing. And I did what I've always done. I do it now, actually. I put on my tackies, I hit the streets, and I went to go meet people to tell them the story of my new auction lines. And I flew around. I came to Pretoria. Peter Gildenhuys then arrived. He was like a bit angry with me, or angry more that Sief hadn't sold the branch to him. And so he resigned. So I suddenly had an office in Pretoria with no staff. We had offices in, actually they were in the Southern Cape. And a lot of people said, we don't want to be part of it. And I suddenly landed up with, I'd bought these branches and there was no one really working in them and people were leaving me. And so I just hit the streets and I came up with my next fluke, which was probably one of the bigger auctions I ever did. Very memorable for me. There was a guy called Jürgen Haxen. He had come to South Africa as a fugitive.
I remember that story.
Yeah, it was a big story. I mean, you must understand, auctions in those days was the 3 Ds. It was death, distress, divorce, and despair. We were like the undertakers of the business world. It wasn't the auctions of today, which have been perfected. It was only distress. And Jürgen Haxen was a very high profile. He was a German billionaire. He subsequently went to jail. And I landed up getting this auction. How I got it again, I just was prepared to go out to secure his assets late at night. And my very first auction Alliance, actually was this very high-profile auction. And it put this Cape-based, remember, Joburg wasn't up for conversation at that point. It put this Cape-based company
on the map.
And all of a sudden, I was one of the 3, we were 3 big auctioneers in Cape Town. And it was like a relatively nice-sized business.
Peter Gildenhuys, you said he resigned. You obviously convinced him to come back.
I did, yes.
Okay.
And it's you mentioned in the beginning, it's like, I do believe life is a series of revolving doors. I think that people, and if you can maintain relations with people, it's not easy because people have.
But he's an easy person to maintain a relationship. He's a wonderful human being, and he's gone on to become a very successful auctioneer in his own right today with his own company.
Yes, I mean, he joined an auctioneer in Pretoria. It didn't go that well, and then later on, when I decided in the year 2000, just after the millennium, I opened up. In 1 year, I opened up Johannesburg, Pretoria, PE, Durban. We went all over the show. I convinced him to come back, and he stayed right until the very end of Auction Alliance. He stayed for many years.
And then there were other people that joined your company. I mean, there's a number of them, but your business grew and it evolved, and it really started doing exceptionally well. And I think what happened, from what I saw, I think I kind of remember how I first saw you at Auction Alliance. Was an auction in Cape Town, but it was the marketing. It was the branding. When did you decide that because the auction companies weren't doing that at any stage, and all of a sudden there was this blue and white company painting the town, and they were the most amazing. I mean, they took all the other residential companies and they became insignificant when it came to the marketing and the branding, and that's what caught my attention. When did you actually say, you know what, the marketing is required and advertising? I mean, because that was, I think, a big thing in your life.
It was a big thing. And look, I'd always liked marketing. I learned a lot from, Sief was a great school. I hope that Auction Alliance was a great school, and even Inospace was a great school. But Sief was, they were great marketers. They did know. So I learned a lot from them. And what Sief had done was they had, their model was really to create like a corporate image of real estate. Now, there were corporates around. Companies like Broll existed. J.H. Isaacs were big in the commercial side. Remember, we hadn't done commercial yet. That came later, a little bit later. But I decided we're going to create this corporate brand. Now, the reason I did was because banks were our major suppliers of business, and they were corporatizing. And I said, I want to create a business that looks and feels and smells like a private bank, like a corporate bank. And so it changed. Auctioneers always used to cruise around under trucks, and they were selling equipment and farm equipment and furniture. And we were the suit guys. I was the suit guy. Every day, put in a suit. Used to wear a suit and tie. We used to put in a suit and tie. and to create a corporate look. And then I met a young marketer. He was a guy called René Jackson, and I convinced him to join. And I said, come, let's go build a proper brand. Now, that requires investment. I didn't pull out huge money. I invested a huge amount into the brand. And
you did an amazing job, because that's what got my attention. And that's what the first thing that I looked at. And I remember speaking to someone in Cape Town, and I said, listen, who is this company? I want to be part of it. I was in retail at the time, and I said, they're doing something different, and that's what makes them better and exceptional and unforgettable. And I think that kind of like outline or framed or shaped you for the future.
I mean, people always say to me, I don't know if I take it as a compliment, they say, oh, you're a great marketer. But actually, truth is, I'm not the greatest marketer. I suppose
Prepared to market.
I've got like an innovative streak in me, and I like to be innovative and be different. So whatever somebody was doing, I wanted to be different. If they were charging, I changed the whole commission way it worked in South Africa. Everybody used to work on seller's commission, and then I came up with buyer's commission. I used to do auctions on Saturdays because no one would do it on Saturdays. I would do whatever anybody did. I like to do to be different as a different company. If all the auctioneers would sell cattle and farm equipment, I only wanted to sell real estate. If people would have auction houses were based in warehouses in Portland Island and in Wynberg here in Johannesburg, I was going to be in the city. So I really did, but I took a lot of inspiration in that period. Today it's much easier because of AI. But I used to go to, because remember I was taking this time, I wanted to go to Australia. So I used to go watch what they did in Australia. So I used to say, okay, I used to come back from Australia. I went with René to Australia. I'd come back with the brochures and say, we've got to do it like this. We make this thing look glossy, make it look like the Australians. And then when the 2001 came, was the big momentous change. And the big momentous change was the economy started picking up in South Africa. The recession ended, interest rates dipped, and it was panic for me. We were bearing in mind that this was an insolvency business. It was distress, despair, and there was no distress around. And now I had quite a big business, and I was worried that
everyone thought that the only time you went to an auction was
Correct.
When it was being sold for nothing.
Correct. And that, I think that still exists in certain places. But at that stage, it was we would never sell our property by auction. It's only for bankrupt people. And so I saw in Australia that when markets rise, when markets rise and markets drop, by the way, auctions are incredible in those two environments. Because when markets rise, you're suddenly starting to get prices which are above what traditional valuations are. And people think you're a genius, but it's actually just it's the mechanism where demand and supply meets. And so I saw it in Australia, and I then came back to South Africa, and I said, we are going to start something new in South Africa. It's never done before. And we were going to start where we took a whole lot of people into a hotel room and created what I then called multiple auctions. It had never been done before. Every auction, many of the auctioneers are still around, they would stand on this. If you were selling a building in Commissioner Street in Joburg, you go stand on the street corner on Commissioner Street, an auctioneer, and everyone would stand around. And I thought to myself, this is a bit tough, because you could actually do more volume on one specific day. And so I decided to do the very first auction. So I had people working for me in Cape Town. They were conservative. They said it'll never work. No chance they're going to work.
There's always going to be the naysayers.
Oh, they were all naysayers. All the other auctioneers thought I was absolutely crazy. And they said, Levitt doesn't know what he's doing.
Did Orco at that time, were they not doing multiple auctions?
So Orco had picked up a few portfolios, and Orco were also very innovative, by the way. Eddie Winterstein had lived in the United States. I mean, at that stage of my life, these people are like gods for me. I mean, the Wintersteins, to me, that was there were the three. There were two.
You were taking on the big guns.
There were two brothers of three. There was the Lazarus brothers at Park Village, and there was the Winterstein brothers at Orco. And they were I was this little Okie from Cape Town, and they were like the big players. I mean, they were really big. And I was actually quite close to the Lazarus brothers. They used to use me as a Cape Town representative. And I came into Joburg, and Orco had done multiple auctions, but it wasn't on a sustainable basis. So they would go find one of their first auctions was for Sanlam. There's a guy called Bonnie Olivier, and they did an auction on that base, but it wasn't the repetitive multiple auctions that we did. And so where you took multiple sellers, actually, it was always one seller.
I remember going to their early auctions. I mean, they were all dressed like farmers.
Yes.
He's a wonderful chap. I mean, I've met Eddie and I've spoken to him many times. He really is a character. but there was no corporate image there amongst them. And I remember those brown shoes and those beige pants and the black belt and the yellow green top. I mean, they really looked like a Springbok in their going away kit. But they, the what you did from there is.
No, we came in razzle dazzle.
Yeah, I mean, it was next level stuff.
I met a young guy. He was 18. He said to me, "Knows about technology." A guy called Ryan Joffe. I said, "Come work." He actually said, "I'm coming to work for you." I phoned his mother. I said, "Listen, I think your son's bright. He must go to university." She said, "I can't control this kid. Maybe you can." I had this youngster called Ryan Joffe. He knew about computers. If you look at a photo, you'll see Ryan Joffe sitting behind the computer at our very first auction here at the Maslow Hotel in Joburg. And it was the first time where it was different sellers. So they had done multiple, it had always been one, but this was now different sellers. We did our first auction at the Maslow Hotel, and it was a failure. It was a big failure. I was like embarrassed. My guys who worked for me in Cape Town were like, "Yeah, I told you so." And I mean, there's something in my personality is when I come across like adversity, it's like, I will make this successful if I lose a limb in the process. And so I thought about it. And Sanlam they were quite pivotal because Sanlam was disposing of a lot of assets at that time. And then there was Old Mutual. So it was Sanlam and Old Mutual. They were selling a lot of the REITs. The REITs had just started in South Africa. And there was all these new REITs around. There was a lot of trading. And I thought, well, if we can't get Sanlam, let me try get Old Mutual, which is based in Cape Town. And I thought, I'd seen there was a few commercial auctions. And so we convinced a few sellers and Old Mutual on one or two properties. And then we did the next auction at Maslow. And it was an absolute runaway success. I'll never forget. We had like mandates of, there was a shopping center in Midrand. We had a mandate to get 5 million rand, and we sold it for like 10 million rand. And the reason we sold for 10 million because interest rates had dropped. Everybody wanted shopping centers. The REITs were that was the era when we literally would sit on the floor and there'd be in
those stages, I remember
bidding against each other.
You were selling almost 100% of the properties that you were advertising. I mean, it was known. I mean, because when the inquiries came through, is that one been sold? Is that one been sold? Is that one? They were all being sold. Out of 20, 30, 40 properties, they were all being sold, maybe bar one or two. Okay. I mean, it really was a time when South Africa property market and industry was hitting a wave and was booming and was flying, and everyone who had stuck around, didn't immigrate and didn't leave the country, decided that they want to buy a property.
Yeah, I mean, it was pure good timing and good fortune. The market was running and auctions were achieving record success after record success. And then we had Norman was crazy. We had no competition. In Johannesburg, the Lazarus sort of kept in their distressed stable, which they were very good at, and they were impressive guys. Orcor were a bit of competition, but we had no competition in Johannesburg. In Cape Town, interestingly enough, the then owners of Claremont sort of poo-pooed what we were doing. They said, no, it's never going to work, and they didn't do it. We had a 3-year run in Cape Town. We didn't have one bit of competition. I then opened up in Durban, the local auctioneers. They also said they'd run us out of town. I'll never forget bumping into guy Ian Wiles. And we went into Durban. We started in Durban, no competition either. We opened up in Port Elizabeth, no competition either. Auction Alliance had no competition for many, many years, actually. And then we learned various things. So like the fall of the hammer, the auctioneers used to do weird things. They would like sell it. You'd get like a top dollar, and they said, okay, no, we have to wait like 3 weeks now. And the buyers were going like, so we said, hold on a second, I saw in Australia that I used to go there and I used to watch and come back and say, no, we must on the fall of them. And then came, that was the critical moment. And now it was about building big teams, which is really where you enter into the movie, yourself and others.
But tell me when did you get Transaction Capital and Mark Limberti involved?
So that happened a bit later. Transaction Capital in the auction business, it boomed, and all of a sudden, and the first few years were not easy, by the way. It was not easy at all. It was we had branches all over the show. It was a huge amount of pressure. I would literally go I would fly to Joburg, I'd fly to Durban. We appointed auctioneers in all these different regions.
And you did most of those auctions?
I did a lot of the auctions. I actually didn't do so many in Cape Town. We had Christian Stewart in Cape Town, so he just did a lot of those auctions down there. I would do a lot of the auctions up here. We also had Pitta, but Pitta was more sort of focused on the agri and on the Afrikaans markets. So I would do the auctions over here. In Durban, I initially did the auctions. We got a guy called Andrew Miller up there. He was a livestock auctioneer and selling horses. But I would literally, and I would attend every auction. I used to fly around the country, auction after auction. And it then really became corporate. And then I decided, probably mistakenly, I said, okay, look, hold on a second, this is going really well. Maybe we can get involved in the financing of auctions. I got a lot of approach from banks. First National Bank actually approached me, and they said, listen, we want to grow our property finance part of our business. Can we give financing? I met a guy at Investec Bank called Gary Palmer. I headhunted Gary. I said, come, Gary, let's start doing financing. In fact, his business today, Paragon, actually was called Alliance Finance. And he worked internally. And I suddenly got the tension. I was very friendly with the guy who I liked a lot. He was like a mentor to me, a guy called Les Mattison. And Les knew Johnny Jorno and Michael Mendelowitz. And they had set up Transaction Capital. And Transaction Capital was a financier. And so this is pre the global financial crisis. They looked at the business and they valued the business at a very high valuation. They valued this auction alliance in that period at over 300 million. And they bought a third from me at over 100 million rand transaction. And I was fighting with them for every last share. And they came in as a big shareholder. And of course, then a lot of things started changing because now we had to corporatize and fit into Transaction Capital, who subsequently listed their company.
And there was been that, I think the chairman was Mark Lamberti, or the CEO.
Mark Lamberti was Mendelowitz and Jorno, two hugely successful businessmen. I mean, today they own We Buy Cars and they own various other places. SA Taxi Finance, which has had its issues, but they had grown a really big business, and they were also planning to list, which they subsequently did, and they got Mark Lamberti, who was the king of retail, and he became the CEO. And I mean, they only owned 30. In fact, we had such a fight. I gave them another 1%, so they owned 31% of Auction Alliance.
He must have taught you a lot working in that stable. They must have been an eye opener. I mean, what was it like working with one of the legends of the industry in South Africa? I mean, he was at that stage the doyen of retail.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Lamberti was and is a legend.
He was.
He started Massmart, which was Macro, and he subsequently, they went on a big roll out. He had left Macro at that point. Massmart went on to do the deal with Walmart, and Mark he actually mentored me, and I still have a relationship with Mark Lamberti to this day, and he mentored me, and I did learn a lot from them. I mean, it became very corporate. It was probably too corporate, actually, for an auction business. And
looking back, do you regret doing that deal?
Actually, what happened was I did the deal, and then I'll never forget. I was sitting. We had offices not far from here in Scott Street, and I'll never forget sitting at that boardroom table one day, and I looked around the table, and there was like a whole board. And everyone was a chartered accountant at the table except me. And I thought to myself, sometimes you do these things, I don't know, I don't know if I'm quite sure if I signed. And it was because and Mark was he was like the king of corporate governance as well. Everything was through the chair. And I thought, I'm just like a trader from Belleville. I don't know if this is the right thing. And so, in fact, I went to visit my sister, had been living in the States for many years. I went to the States, and the global financial crisis arrived. And the global financial crisis was, everybody thought it was over. They thought it was going to be this massive problem. And when I actually was in America, I saw a thing called a short sale. I never forget, I went for a run, I saw a short sale. I thought it was interesting. I spoke to people in America, and a short sale was where the bank was about to repossess a property, but instead of actually doing the foreclosure, which in South Africa was the sale and execution process, you would do it early. And I came back with this idea to do foreclosure sales, because I was worried that the commercial property auctions were going to dry up because the money was tight, the markets were poor, and I had this big business. And so I came up with this idea. Ironically, I went back to Absa Bank, who had started me in the first place, and I went and I convinced them to do these short sales, and we called it RAP. And the business then actually had another boom, because in fact, what happened is...
You had a couple of hundred of properties going on auction every week.
Correct.
Almost every second or third week there was in all the provinces there were these.
We did in the year of the global financial crisis, the year thereafter. So we did 5,000 houses by auction, sold 5,000 houses by auction. We were doing a couple of hundred in every region of the country. In fact, in places we hadn't even been before. Even in Joburg, we used to do the West Rand, the East Rand, and the Mid Rand, and Pretoria. And in Durban, we did Durban, South Coast, North Coast, and Cape Town, all over the show. And ironically, the commercial property market, the commercial property business was under pressure, but actually South Africa was seen as a developing economy. It didn't actually collapse like people thought. And so the commercial property business went through a little bit of a dip, and then it came back roaring back.
But I think soon thereafterwards they introduced the REITs.
The REITs were around.
And that attracted a lot of properties to go into those vehicles. Yeah.
I mean, in retrospect, we're probably doing too much because, you have to become really good at something. And so, I mean, in retrospect, we probably should have just done commercial property. But we were doing resi. We also had a big farming division, which is actually the very last auction I did was a farm. It fell under our agricultural division. We did a lot of farms, and then we did, we got a person, some Ariella Cooper came into the business. We were doing ships and movables and aeroplanes, and Auction Alliance was doing everything. And by 2010, we were literally 60 to 70% of every auction in South Africa was done by Auction Alliance on a national basis.
And then you went back to Transaction Capital and bought them out.
Transaction Capital came to me. I met at Mark Lamberti's house in Sandhurst, and he said to me, look, we want to list this company. We're going to be listing it. And we can't have a minority stake in this company. So either we're going to buy you out or you're going to buy us out. And that, Norman, was a big mistake, actually, of mine. Because what happened was I had other friends that sold into Transaction Capital. It went onto a great listing. Their share price boomed. And I thought about it, and I thought, look, I don't want to just be like a small cog in a big machine, and I don't know if I could sell 100%. And of course, I wasn't in love. And love is a very dangerous thing because it's a dangerous thing between humans, but love is a very dangerous thing between a human and a business. Because like what I do know now today is that if somebody wants to buy your business, sell it. And I've listened to a couple of people on your shows. They've sold businesses, and I should have sold the whole thing into them. But love made me blind, and I bought the whole thing back. And I literally paid them back a big number. In fact, Auction Alliance didn't last very much longer after buying them back. I carried on paying them back the money after Auction Alliance had shut its doors. And so I bought the whole thing back, and now I was the proud owner of Auction Alliance. Together with we had a Black Empowerment partner. In fact, I don't even call him Black Empowerment because he was a partner. He's still a friend, Sanga Insaluba, fantastic human being. And I went back to being like the owner of the business. But it didn't last very long, by the way, between that and the 10th of December.
But you were still doing well, and then came the infamous or the auction. That was pivotal, I think, and your tsunami in life. I mean, everyone doesn't know this, but you were in 2004 in Thailand when the actual tsunami took place. People died and didn't recover. You were there. You managed to get out of that. That was your physical tsunami. But then later on in life, this happens. Talk us through Coin Rock and Wendy. I know maybe it's sensitive. I know it's a difficult discussion, but that's why we're here. And I think people would like to hear a little bit about
the nice thing on your podcast is that you do have the nice ability to ask difficult questions in a nice way. So the truth is, I had been in the physical tsunami. I did learn lessons from it, but I think, it's quite interesting. I think actually everybody has big dramas in their life. And the truth is, people have tsunamis. I mean, you've had it, I've had it. Many of these successful people that we know have had it, whether it's Elon Musk, whether it's Adrian Gore, whether it's Stephen Kosseff. Many people who are successful have big drama. When I'm walking into your offices, I was looking at one of your quotes on your wall, and it completely resonates with me. It's because difficulty and difficult times do bring good things, even if we can't see them in the moment. I just think that the truth be told is that mine was just much more public, and it was a little bit more dramatic because a billionaire and a high-flying auctioneer. But many people have had these dramatic moments. And And I think actually, if you're a person who takes risk, I mean, you can just sit at home and put your head under a pillow and under a rock and you can have a very happy life doing that. But for people who take risk, for people who do things, bad things do sometimes happen. I think you're a very lucky person if it doesn't happen. And so for me, the tsunami happened and a tsunami really is, to me, it was more representative of something which you're just not expecting. It's like, I just wasn't expecting that. And that happens to many people because there are things that are going to happen in your life,
But Rael Levitt was the king of auctions, king of commercial property, king of residential property in South Africa at the time, and the icon when it came to public profile and out there. And it was everyone respected you as that. So when it came about and it was so broadly publicized, obviously, what do they say? The highest leaves or branches catch the most wind. That's what happened.
It did happen, and it was instant obliteration. It was literally, for me, it felt as a human being, not as a businessman. It felt like being on the 20th story of a building and falling out on the building and landing on the ground and saying, "What the fuck happened? Like, what happened?" Because it wasn't, it wasn't as if like auction lines had a bad reputation and that I was like, oh, he's a crook, and it finally happened. It really went from like being like entrepreneur of the year, being the top auctioneer, from that into being the villain of the industry. The media story went on for so long, and it developed such legs after Quinrock. And
looking back, do you think? I mean, could you have handled it differently with the experience that you have today, or did you do were there a couple of mistakes, or do you think if you were there again, the same result would have played out? Because I don't think, personally, when looking at you today, I think that was actually bittersweet because it worked out for you. Looking at what you've accomplished and achieved today, you got to reinvent yourself.
I mean, the answer, I'd love to say to you, Norman, I'm philosophical. It was all meant. It was, in retrospect, it was great, but I went through a terrible 5 years. It wasn't instant to sort of reinvent myself. It took 5 years. It was the most terrible thing. I don't think many people can't understand that. It wasn't that it was losing, and I lost the business, but it wasn't just losing the business. It was part of my identity. Remember, I was an auctioneer from the age of 20. This happened, by the way, as I turned 40. It was losing my identity. It was, I was hugely embarrassed. I couldn't put my face in public. I used to sort of hide in the shadows. And it
went on.
It went on. And of course, it wasn't just a media story. The authorities picked up the story and they liked it. And they liked it because it was, they thought it led on to like this whole corrupt industry, which was total over-exaggeration. And it was like, and they were like, so Levitt was training all these people to use ghost bidders, and they were paying kickbacks to this one and that one and everybody. I really became, I went actually on the legal attack, and I was in lawsuits with the Hawks, with the then Estate Agents Affairs Board. There was multiple investigations into me. But I do want to answer the question which you asked me, could I have handled it better? And let me say this right now. Okay, I handled it shockingly. It wasn't like in retrospect, I could have handled it completely different. In fact, the truth is that had I just had a cup of coffee with Wendy Applebaum, I could have resolved the whole issue. But I was caught up a bit in the hubris. I was actually quite scared of her. I was scared of the story, and I handled it very, very badly. And in many ways, I've gone through this in my mind, not 5 times, not 10 times, 10,000 times. What would I have done differently with hindsight as a great science in retrospect? And I could have done a lot of things right, and I handled it shockingly. And
have you ever spoken to Wendy again after that and cleared it up and sort of, because I know that it was a hugely contentious issue. You had loggerheads with the legally and everything, but did you manage to ever get to around a table and chat to her? Or?
So, one of the maddest things, and people often ask me, do you know that I have never met Wendy Applebaum? Everybody thought we had this big fight and we had this. So what actually happened I didn't even know who she was. Somebody mentioned, one of our guys mentioned to me, that she was, the late Donnie Gordon, who was really a South African icon. One of South Africa's greatest businessmen was his daughter. And at the auction, you know auctions. So at the auction, I was on the podium when the property was finally knocked down to her. I went up to congratulate her, and I just said congratulations. I left the auction, which was a big mistake as well. I left it up to people, and then on the phone, I had like a 2-second conversation with her, and when I said to her, Randy, relax, I'll get back to you. And that's the total sum of conversation I've ever had with her. I subsequently actually tried to, I apologized publicly to her. Not so long ago, I said, look, when my book came out, I actually said, look, it would be, I do want to, I wrote mails to her, and she is still not interested in meeting with me. And I've never actually met with her. And what I did was wrong. So I'm not.
You've admitted you're wrong. It takes a big man to admit their mistakes. Sometimes in an act of defense, you attack. I'm not saying that you did at the time.
I did, and it was wrong.
But you looking back, you've acknowledged that you could have done it differently. And it's hopefully, from my side, hopefully one day you get to sit around with her and have a chat and things.
Yes, I have to tell you funny stories. I've told nobody else, but I'll do it on your podcast. That very recently was the Investec Art Fair, and of course, for me, it's today. I'm a big customer of Investec. I was invited to their suite, and I'm walking around. I see the CEO of the bank, and one of the funny things, I actually own a building right next door to the Cape Town Convention Centre, and there was like this big Inospace signs. In fact, even my name, because my marketing came up with like quite a shrewd idea to say have like contact Rael. And as I'm walking past, I like recognize a person, and then Wendy Applebaum walks past me. And, I've like rehearsed 1,000 times what I was going to say to her, literally 1,000 times. Like we're going to bump into it one time. And I walked past her, and I was just walked past her. And I thought, I don't feel like it today. And I just carried on walking. And then I was in my car. So, oh God, maybe that took like is your moment to say sorry or make like a funny chip. But she was quite determined, walking in one direction. And we just passed each other like ships in the night in the corridor. I'm sure we'll have a moment sooner or later.
It'll happen. I believe things happen for a reason. But it was over. The legacy of Auction Lines that came tumbling down. The Rael Levitt, the name, you were 5 years, you were not in a good place. I hadn't even been in contact with you for that whole period, but I'd heard that you were struggling to get through. And then you obviously made a conscious decision to reinvent yourself, to obviously you went from a little bit chubby to you got healthy, started running and getting healthy again, obviously helping the well-being of your mind to get something. From there, you went and did 2 master's degrees abroad. You came back with obviously a lot of ideas that you brought to South Africa. Just briefly on that period, because I think it's important to know from rock bottom, not to the top, just to being able to survive again and to be around people and show your face and say, I'm back and I'm going to start again.
Yeah, just briefly, as a person, I was suffering from depression. In my early years, I've never admitted I was on medication. I was really depressed. And then I just decided one day, it's one of the things I treated with that every single person, we are the master of our own destiny. We can determine our own future. And it was just something switched in my brain again. And I said, whatever I do, I will resolve this. And so I decided to get out of town. And I went out of town. I went to UCLA. I went to do a degree there. I subsequently went to Singapore. And when I sort of found my voice again, when I arrived at UCLA, I was so embarrassed. It was like, I felt like people think I was like Bernie Madoff. The Americans are very cool. You've been in a scandal, means you're famous. And so I found my voice in there. And then I came up with the idea of Inospace while I was studying. And I came back to South Africa, and I basically started.
Did you came up with the idea? Did you see it there?
No, I didn't see it there. In fact, what happened was while I was in the States, I was looking at technology and I was thinking what I should do with my life. And one of the big options was to go and become an auctioneer in America, bearing in mind that the Hawks investigated me for 10 years. And so there was always in the back of my mind, there was always this concept that, maybe they, in the end, they actually came back and they said, look, our investigation came to nothing. But the investigation actually was going on in the background. So I thought maybe I'd become an auctioneer in America. I thought maybe I'd go to Australia. And so I came up with the idea because I was looking into how technology would impact real estate. And the obvious thing was that retail real estate. People were going to be buying online, which was happening in the States because of Amazon. In South Africa, Takealot and Amazon today, Checker 6060. So to change retail real estate, it was also, I thought offices, I got that one right. I suppose one of the things I've always liked to do is look into the future. I thought office was going to be a problem because people would have phones, they could be running accounting things from home. Obviously, COVID taught us that. And then I looked at warehousing and I thought industrial, that's interesting because it was the poor side of the market. And I thought, hold on, and I thought this is interesting. I said, if we buy industrial assets at very cheap prices and put a bit of, I liked WeWork at the time. WeWork was very big in the States. I used to go look at all the WeWorks there. I thought if you can create like an element where you provide additional services in industrial, that would be very innovative. And I bumped into Gary Palmer, actually, who I'd worked with previously. He introduced me to a businessman in South Africa who'd invested in Sirius in Germany. They listed on the JSE and listed in the UK. And I actually went to Germany to go look at this model. And so was born Innovation Space, which became Inospace. I bought my first asset. Investec was the only bank that I went to because Investec came to me and they said to me, look, if you ever want to start something again, we would look at funding you. I didn't even try the rest because I thought the rest would say, oh, this is Rael Levitt, the crooked auctioneer. And I would say it on your show, I have a huge soft spot for them. They're not the cheapest in town, but certainly they gave me a chance. And so I bought my first building in Epping in Cape Town. And so...
But how did you think that, there's these doyens of the industrial space, these multiple industrial like mini warehouses, these parks, and you bought this property in Epic, and now all of a sudden you're going to do a bit of a upgrade and charge almost 50% more. Surely there must have been some resistance in your mind to say, you know what, it's not going to work. But what made you really believe that product could work? Because these people have been doing that for years.
Yes.
And didn't believe. We always thought that was the hurdle or the hedge or the ceiling of rentals.
Well, when I started in the auction business, people have been doing it for years too. And when I did multiple auctions, they said it was crazy, and being innovative, this was crazy. So I saw it working in Germany. To me, it was just so obvious. It was when you go to a shopping center and you look at a shopping center and you've got your big anchors, which would be your big retailers, like ShopRite or Woolworths or Pick n Pay or whatever. And then they would pay a certain rate and the line shops would pay another rate. And on industrial, I went along and bearing in mind, I'd been in real estate for a long time, but I'd never been a big owner. I'd owned a few buildings. In fact, you and I owned a building or two. But I'd never been a big owner. But I worked this out. I said, hold on a second. I said, well, what is the rental rate for an industrial property in Lindbro Park? What's an industrial rate of property in Pardon Island? They say, look, the values would say it's 50 Rand a square meter at that stage, and that's 50 Rand a square meter. And I said, well, if it's 10,000 square meters, it's 50 Rand a square meter. That's a yes. And I said, if it's 2,500 square meters, it's 50 Rand. They say yes. I said, okay. And if it's 500 square meters, it's 50 Rand. They'd say yes. And I said, if it's 100 square meters, they said, it's also, I said, that doesn't make any sense because online shops are getting 5 times the rate on a small little shop next to your big box. And so I realized that people don't pay rate per square meter. People don't, even in your business, you don't bank percentages. You're banking cash. People who are selling on your auctions and they're making profits, or people who are buying, it's not about the percentages. So I said, hold on a second. Could we take a big warehouse and create a little warehouse and charge 10,000 Rand a month? Small business doesn't go, oh, let me get my tape measure out and work it out on a rate per square meter. And they could afford 10,000. It just so happened that 10,000 Rand equated to 100 Rand a square meter. And so Inospace was born. But it wasn't an easy birth. Now, at that time, I got involved because to recreate myself, I had to do a whole lot of things. And it was very, very difficult. And so the first thing that happened was there was a group of entrepreneurs who were doing a development in Cape Town. It was called Bantry Hills, and they invited me to get into it. And I knew nothing about development. And the only reason I went into Bantry Hills, and they don't even know this, was actually the association. Because when the banks would say, oh, I'm with Mike Flax, or with Ronnie Mazur, I'm with the Fabians, if Flax, and at that stage they were busy, they're just listing, it was actually at the very same time as they were listing Spear. If Flax and Fabian, and they were all actually on public companies, if they could say Levitt's not a crook and we're going to business with Levitt, then maybe he's not so bad. And so I got involved in Bandreels. I was very much a silent partner, although I did come up with the name Bandreels. And I added like my little bit of flavor. I mean, they were properly running it. I mean, the flavor I added was because I was traveling in America and I saw places where there's swimming pools and gyms, I sort of added that flavor in. And then I actually said I would do the marketing because that was my sort of sweet spot. And I never forget, I was in Beverly Hills and I thought, because it's not in Bantry Hills, actually. It's not in Bantry, but it's actually in Sea Point. And then I looked at Sandhurst Estate, and I remember going to my co-shareholders, and I said, "Look, I know I've been accused of ghost betting, but we're going to create a name here, but it isn't." And they said, "Oh, we love it," and so it became Bantry Hills, and it became a great success story. But Investec then came to me after my second Inospace, and they said to me, "Listen." There was one more story that the same journalist had written about me, had written the story, making up that I was about to be arrested. And so the banks sort of pulled back. And it just so happened that I had been on a flight and I bumped into Jonathan Bear. And I'd been many years before, I'd done deals with Jonathan Bear. And he said to me, "Listen, the story about you is now really over-exaggerated, and I don't believe you did anything wrong. I mean, I was partners with you, you were absolutely honorable. And if you need anything, I'll back you." And so I had actually had a property under offer from Investec Property Group at that stage. They listed Investec Property Group in Cape Town and Maitland. And I was under contract. And Investec said to me, "Sorry, Boetie, love you to bits, but we're not going to finance this one." And so I approached Sean Hurwitz, which is one of the Buff companies. And they literally on a handshake went and they helped. We bought the property together. They became a shareholder, and I went literally from 3 properties to, when COVID happened, to a R1 billion portfolio with them, and they were the most incredible partners. They backed me. They never questioned me for a minute.
I think if you ask him, I think you were the most incredible partner to them. I think they didn't do much. They provided the finance and they got.
Well, they're the smartest guys in town, and they do know how to make money. But I only worked that out when we subsequently did the deal with Fortress, which was just after COVID.
They've actually been very successful. There are a lot of entrepreneurs backing them, supporting them, financing them, and making them and helping them realize their dreams in the businesses that some of them have started off from.
Well, they also gave me credibility. So I suddenly arrived back at Investec, and I'll never forget, the Investec guys came to see me and they said, "Okay, listen, now you're partners with Bear. It's like a whole different movie. And sort of the gates are open for you to do big business." And so I grew it into substantial business. And then, of course, COVID hit.
And what did that do for you?
Well, when COVID hit, it was now deeply entrenched in me that from bad comes good, which I genuinely, like, if you ask me, like, what's the one thing an entrepreneur knows? That when you've got adversity and you don't give up and you have that grit to say, "You know what, I'm going to go through the difficult times. I'm going to cry when I cry. I'm going to be depressed when I'm depressed." But that grit to start over again, that grit to say, "You know what, I will turn this bad situation into a good situation." It was so entrenched in me. So when COVID came and the whole world thought it was a bad situation, for me, it was like, bring this on, baby, because I know that everyone's going to panic, which they did. And everybody panicked, but not me. I didn't spend a day at home during COVID. It wasn't that I didn't believe it medically, but we were open because we had industrial parks, and I would go every single day, and not a soul moving. I would go to all our parks. And I realized that COVID would present this incredible opportunity because things would come right. And the world would come right. And I should have had much more balls than I did, Norman. I mean, I should have bought everything I saw. And you don't understand, they were panicking the REITs. I mean, even my last meeting before we had to go shut down was with Growth Point. I mean, they were going to sell me stuff. Redefine, they were offloading. And so it was at that moment when I grew Inospace. We doubled in that year. And of course, I got involved in Lift Airlines. It was also a COVID story.
Before you get to Lift, you also got involved with Fortress.
I did. So I'd known the Fortress guys. They're very nice guys. I liked Fortress. And I wanted
Didn't that kind of double your fund size?
It did. And so Fortress deal actually was the Buffett guys sold out their shares. I didn't sell any shares. So they swapped. So Buffett sold their shares to Fortress, so they cashed out. So the truth is, to answer your question, I did land up being a good partner because they did very well from the transaction. And we did a merger of it was 1.25 billion. It was about 700 million rand of their assets and about 600 million of their assets and 600 million ours. And we merged it as a part of the business called Innofort. And we merged that deal. And that was done during like the end of COVID. And And it was one of those ironies in life. I went to their offices, they're down the road here in Sandton, and we signed the deal. And we signed a deal with 1.2 billion rand. Standard Bank funded the deal. We became partners. It just so happened that I signed the deal on the 10th of December. It was exactly 5 years from the date of the Quinrock auction. I looked at my watch, it's like today's the 10th of December. Yeah. It was on that day. I then took a run. I ran around Joburg. I cried the entire way. I just couldn't believe that from that, I just signed this 1.2 billion rand transaction. And it changed, it doubled Inospace. We went from a 1 billion fund into like a 2 billion today. It's about
and then you added the tech and the logistics part of it. I mean, that's like all innovative stuff that you obviously you learned to bring to the table.
Yeah,
talk us through. I mean, that's also a game changer because no one else had done that, and that's
now everybody's starting to do it.
But in the industrial parks, I think it's also different.
So one of the things that Inospace we said from day one, said, look, we're not actually a property business. We're a service business, and and I've got all these things, which is something the auction is like. I don't call people tenants. Like I get cross. I was at a meeting yesterday. My guys saying tenants. I say no. We call them clients. The word landlord is banned in our business because I believe if you're selling space, you are just providing a service like everybody else. And so I looked at it in a very different way. There's a name for it. They call it space as a service. I followed an author in America who calls it like the reimagining of real estate. And real estate is a service business. Now, I'd been in a service business for many, many years. And so I regard it as a service. And so for me, it's not just about the square meters. It's actually about adding in more. And so a lot of the technology was actually to give more to these clients. And our clients are small businesses. They're largely SMEs. We have very few big corporate clients. It was very unpopular in the beginning. It was a lot of the banks said, oh, these are horrible tenants. They're high risk. But I believe in SMEs. In fact, I deeply believe in SMEs. I believe that every big business starts off as a small business. I believe that is the one thing that's missing in South Africa is small businesses must be encouraged. We want to see the development and the growth of small businesses. And so Inospace for me, I mean, it was a few things. First of all, even its logo, I didn't even tell anyone what the logo meant because the logo, it's a circle of life. It means that life loops from good to bad and that life continues. And so, but it also was like a place for me on that entrepreneurial side to actually say, SMEs aren't bad. I mean, every big business started it. Let's create an environment where we give SMEs a chance. Even the way we look at credit, we don't turn them down. Make leases easy. Instead of 30-page leases, we have like these, I don't know if you know, we have these like 3-page leases. We give tenants breaks. If tenants want to move up, want to move down, we're very open to create this like environment for SMEs. And it's not an easy business, let me tell you, but there's a place for it and no one else wants to do it.
And how many square meters?
So today we're about 500,000, 500,000 square meters of space. We've got about 54. Just bought a new one yesterday, in fact. We've got about 55.
Portfolio size about 3 billion?
It's about 3.5 billion now. It's growing. We've got quite a big strategy to grow it further.
It's a private business. Maybe to list or to sell or list?
I mean, I was listening to a couple of your. I'm interested in some of yours that are still coming out because you have been interviewing listed CEOs. It's an interesting business because it's as a private business, it's got a lot of advantages, but it doesn't have any of the advantages of being REITs. REITs were, as you know, have been quite unpopular until quite recently. Now they're back in the flavor of the month. I think it's probably something which would come.
The timing could be right.
The timing could be right. I'm not sure, truth be told, I'm not going to make that same mistake again, whether I should be the CEO of a listed company. I don't think so. I think one of my mistakes in the past was I sat in that seat for too long. And when you sit in a seat for too long, inevitably something can happen because we, as human beings, we always think it's only going to go right. It's only going to go right. We don't think things could go wrong. And so I'm not, I'm building up now a team. In fact, I've got an MD and I've actually already said, I still would play a role in the business, but I do think that it needs a different skill set. That I'm good at starting things. I don't know if I'm good at running big companies and corporations.
In the middle of COVID, and I would say the most difficult industry in the country, in possibly the world, the airline business. I mean, you have the likes of Comair, Velvet, Sky, Mango, SA Express, one time, all
British Airways.
going in bang. And yet you decided that it was the time to get involved in an airline business and open when everyone else was folding. Now, if you were talking about a gut feel or big kahunas, this, I mean, I can tell you, I wouldn't say that I was a naysayer because I know exactly what you're capable of, but this was daunting. I was going to watch something which I said the time could be perfect, but wow.
Look, I don't want to take the accolades because the accolades do belong to Gidon Novik, who really was actually the king of airlines. But truth be told, what happened it was in that year 2020. 2020 was a year when no one was going out on the streets. I inherently believed, and I do believe because of optimism, because I did believe that things would come right. And I thought to myself, it's like human behavior. I thought people, the minute this COVID thing is over, people want to travel like never before. And so it is true. It is in difficult times and when you should be investing. People always want to do the other way around. It's like people should be streaming at your auctions when it's tough in Joburg. When it's tough in Joburg, it's the time to buy. When times are good, of course, you can buy as well, but it's in difficult moments. And so Gidon said to me once, I was going around to people say, like, there's got to be opportunity. He said to me, look, I'm thinking of starting an airline. And then to me, it was a bit obvious. And it was such a clever deal, which we did, because the most expensive cost in an airline is your cost of your planes. It's like real estate. You want to be in real estate, you have to invest. And so all these owners of the aircraft were desperate. All the guys were on the ground. And so we did this rev share deal. And so truth be told, I'd sold 3 buildings in Voortrekker Road in Cape Town. And I took the profits from this building and I invested not a huge amount of money in Lift Airlines. And I literally thought in the first year we'd go bang. It just so happened it did come roaring back and it turned out to be a good
There
success
might have
story.
been Gidon, but I could see your signature on it because the service, the efficiency, the look, the color, the marketing. I mean, there was Rael all over again. We knew we were involved in that from just looking at it and experiencing it.
Listen, I think Gidon was really most of it. I mean, I did sit with him, and in the beginning, I used to like take photos, and I was like, can't you improve this and can't you improve that? I mean, there was the nice thing about Lift is like, I just like have great service, and they do actually. I mean, to this day, they have great service.
And you wrote a book. 22, you released the book. Was that just to like share with everyone what you went through and to say, I've got a few things to say to the public that maybe you weren't aware of? This is the real Rael. This is my heart, and I would like you can believe me or not believe me, and just listen to how the story was started to end. I mean, obviously, it encapsulated your whole career, which has obviously gone on the last 4 years, even exponentially, even better. The reason behind the book?
Well, I think maybe you give me a good idea. I should have called it The Real Rael, the book. So, I mean, the truth is that I wasn't the CEO of Inospace until 2020. I used to like hide a little bit in the shadows. And even when we did like one big property, one of the big REITs, and they were like, oh, is Rael Levitt involved? And even though I was the buyer, so I kept very much in the background. But when we did the Fortress deal, I sort of emerged as the CEO, like officially of Inospace. And so one of my big mistakes in the auction line story was that I kept quiet. So I had a big mouth, and then I just kept quiet. The rumors just run wild, and people can say whatever they want. So eventually, they were writing. I mean, even recently, I saw an article like I was never convicted of anything. I was never actually charged with anything. But the perception was that some people thought, oh, you're out of jail now and you're back on the streets, and it was like nothing like that ever happened. Auction Lines was never liquidated. Everybody was paid, and so I had this deep burning wanting to tell the story, although I was very afraid that the story could come out wrong. So I wanted to tell the story. But I also wanted to do something else, actually. And I wanted to tell the story to people who've gone through tough times, to say it's so common. And to tell people, actually, it isn't all smooth sailing. If you're a young entrepreneur, you're an old entrepreneur, but it isn't all smooth sailing. And I wanted to tell the story that actually you can go through a tsunami. And it is in those moments, actually, that you really can rise up. And that's actually what changes the world. And I wanted to tell that story because I just thought it was such a nice story to tell. Of course, I did want to tell my story as well. And so I wrote that book. I was put-bung. I was so worried they're going to be crooked auctioneer releases crooked book, and it's like all not true. So I try to be quite authentic in the book and say what I got wrong and I got right. And it turned out to actually be a good story.
I mean, your story you've told, yeah, I mean, it's incredible. Actually, I mean, I love the lows and the highs. I just love hearing how you went from the highs to the lows and the highs, and how you basically self-corrected and made things right and took responsibility. I think that's a big thing. But I need to, in closing, ask you a couple of questions for the people that are listening out there. Do you think entrepreneurs or leaders are born, or do you think you can become a real good businessman?
I think there's something in your personality which is like a go-getter that comes from, but it certainly can be taught. It can be taught and it can be learned. And for me, it's all a learning journey.
One standout character that an entrepreneur needs to have, I would say, obviously, possibly resilience or tenacity. What did you say?
Yes. I mean, I'd say it's grit. It's the same thing. It's the ability to just go and say, yes, we wake up tomorrow morning and we start again. And it's that grit to just carry on.
Business leader that inspires you still to this day, that you look back and you say, you know what, I could learn so much from them, and who would that be?
I like to follow the South African ones because I think South Africans should be so proud. We have such great entrepreneurs in this country. I think people like Stephen Kossef, Adrian Gore, even Donnie Gordon himself, those are hugely inspirational characters. I follow those people. I think they're great. And of course, then the whole Stellenbosch crowd. I'm a big fan of Christo Visser, a huge fan of him. A big fan of many of those very, very successful people.
The single biggest lesson that you've learned over the years?
That the single biggest lesson is that it can all be over in an instant, and that people don't realize that. Like literally your life can change in seconds, and when it changes in seconds, you have to have the ability to pivot.
Rael, to a graduate coming out of school or out of varsity, what would your advice be to them?
It's not going to happen in 3 seconds. I think a lot of people, especially these days, we live in a world that they think it's all going to happen in seconds. It's like you have to work hard. You have to carry on every day. Don't think you're going to be, everyone thinks they're going to be Elon Musk, and 1 minute they were a student, the next thing they're going to be a billionaire. It's going to take time. Just get out there and work and really understand what you are good at, and don't try to be good at everything. Just choose the 1 or 2 things that you're good at and focus on that, and eventually become so good that they can't ignore you.
And tell me the risks that you didn't take that you would look back, take today.
Great question. I would have got involved in big investment much earlier in my life. In fact, a wise man is sitting across the road from the table told me that. I didn't listen to him, actually, because at that stage you said to me, let's invest. So I would have invested much earlier. And I only developed actually the ability to have those bigger balls later on in life. And it was really to invest in a bigger way much earlier. I mean, we all can have 1,000 regrets. I don't like to live life in the rearview mirror, but get in early and take risks early and be more risky, because at the end of the day, if you don't take the risks, you don't want to live back your life looking at, I should have taken that risk.
Anyone that you want to mention that helped you along the way, that made a significant role? I mean, people that are still with you today, like the people that have worked along with you and been bankers, and I don't know, I'm not sure, but there may be some worth mentions.
I mean, I've mentioned a few along the journey who've been great. You work with people, and sometimes it doesn't end well, because by the nature of business, you can have arguments over money. And, I try actually to see that we can, sometimes those relationships are difficult, but you can actually patch those up. And there have been many, many people along the way. I think the one thing I do want to say, and I try to say it actually in the book, was for many years, a lot of people who worked at Auction Alliance there were two types of people. There were those who were ashamed and they took it off their LinkedIn profiles and they pretended they never worked there. And people would say to them, oh, Auction Alliance. And they would say, oh, who's Auction Alliance? Never heard of them. Although they were there for 10 years and they were at every auction. And then there were the other people who said, actually, it was a great school. I did hear what you said on Chai FM. Somebody came to me last night. There were those who said, it was a great school and they were very proud of it. And to those who didn't, I totally get it. I think it's a natural defense mechanism, and I do not hold anything against these people because I hid in the shadows. But for me, to look back at that business and to say, actually, there are many, many entrepreneurs in this country today who came out of that school. And there is no reason to be ashamed of that school. That was a great school. Many people learned. And it's a great example for people to go back and look at what went right and what went wrong, but to look back at it and say it wasn't just a whole big disaster. It actually was a great success story.
I agree wholeheartedly. And even though it went through some very high, lots of highs, I've learned a lot, and some lows that came towards it. I must tell you something. At one particular moment in time, when I was there and when I was leaving, someone said to me, "This is a good thing for you." So I said, "It's impossible. This is my life. I don't want this to happen." And they said, "You can't see it now, but the universe is you're not strong enough to make the decision yourself. So the universe is making it for you, and this is all going to work out." And
what happened?
And it did work out. You recently had a health scare. You went to the cardiologist and you looked around and he said, "Listen, you need a number of stents and you've taken." That's also a significant moment in your life, because sometimes it happens too late when you recognize or you can prevent something from happening. How's that changed your mindset and your outlook?
Funny enough, I don't think it has, because I had the same outlook on it. I mean, luckily I didn't have any symptoms. So it was like, wow, I actually missed a bullet here before I had a heart attack or anything happened. And I sat in that hospital. I sat in the ICU overnight, and with all those machines blipping away. And I looked up and I thought to myself, you know what, just get back in the saddle tomorrow morning, be back at work on Wednesday, which I did. I said to myself, okay, what do you need to do now? Just do the recipe. I said, okay, I've signed up for a half marathon. In fact, this morning I ran here in Johannesburg, 12 kilometers, with my 5 stents pumping away. I did check my heart rate. And I've said, okay, Levitt, what do we always do? Create the next goal. I've got a goal. I'm going to do a marathon before the end of this year, because to me, it signifies this is not going to get you down. And as long as that heart is pumping, I still will be making future goals. I'll still be doing like aspirational things. And so it didn't really change my outlook. It actually reinforced everything I believe.
Well, between the two of us, we've got 9.
Correct. One more stent and we can have a directors meeting.
So, listen, firstly, I would like to obviously thank you for being here. But you're so young still. I mean, you've got a lot going for you. What is on the horizon for Rael? Because I know this is not the end. I know this is start of something bigger and better. Can we expect something in the near future from you?
Look, I don't know. I mean, I think I'll take Inospace to a certain size. I'm not quite sure after that. I do think probably I would. I mean, a lot of people say, but I'd probably like to get into something with entrepreneurs and more on the sort of charity side of life. I do think as you get older, you start realizing it's not all about business. So I definitely want to get involved in actually building something which is not just about profits and the bottom line. I built Inospace to prove to myself that I could do it again. And for me, I'd like to do something which is more on the sort of philanthropic side. And I do like education. I like universities. I think that people like me and you, we now the older state, we don't see it that way actually, but we are now the older statesmen. I think we've got great lessons to give people. I truly enjoy things like this, because I know there's a 20-year-old young Norman and a 20-year-old young Rael is watching this, and they need to learn from the old bullies and say actually, and I think there's like great lessons that can be, and I actually do congratulate you for this, because you've geared it constantly to younger people, and I think that the country grows, the world grows. I think entrepreneurship is such a great thing, and I certainly think I'd like to play my role in that.
So thank you, Rael. I want to, and I'm saying that sincerely, because I think you have helped, taught,
a lot of people in the industry that are still here today, very successful. We've got Into Assets in Durban that evolved out of your stable. You taught them, they're there. There's other companies that are in Johannesburg that have been very successful in the auction, in the property industry. I mean, Herman Zolte worked for you in the original stages. Myself, I was there. And, everyone learned a lot. And I think you've been an incredible businessman from a young age, and it stood out and it hasn't kept you down. You've reinvented yourself. You've proven that time and time again. And in everything that you've created is better than your competitors, and you've exceeded expectations. I mean, most certainly not mine, because I knew and I worked with you and I knew what you were capable of. But from our team at Braadcast, I think, and the viewers, thank you so much for allowing us to hear your story. It's been an incredible one. We really appreciate it and wish you all the very, very best of your business and of you and your team into the future. And thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Norman.
Thank you. I'm Norman Raad, and see you on the next one. And please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Cheers for now.